huge thanks to all of you for being here today. So, let's begin. This is a world where you can say that part of your country is an island of garbage and you win. This is the world where you can say that immigrants eat dogs and you win. This is a world where people on your side can say that the others manipulate the weather and create devastating storms. You still win. And let us be honest, this world is not just the USA. We have all seen it in other countries and in wider society. This is the end of the world as we know it, and I do not feel fine. The geopolitical and environmental climate around us makes this new world even more complicated. Situation in the Middle East, unrest in many parts of Africa, and the climate crisis make it very difficult to navigate. So if we do not feel fine about it, what can we do about it? What can a professor of law in a law school in Scotland do about it? What can teaching and researching in climate change law do about it? In a way, I want to do this together with you. This inaugural lecture wants to open up a discussion around these very big questions. And let's be honest. Our first reaction to the end of the world as we know it is to go full ostrich. And some people in this room told me that after the Trump's election. But together, I want to get my neck out of the sand and also go beyond the words on the jumper. Non voglio soluzioni, voglio solo lamentarmi. Translated, this means I do not want solutions, I only want to complain. Following the wise words of Jon Stewart from The Daily Show, on the night of the US elections, he said, "We're all going to have to wake up tomorrow morning and work like hell to move the world to the place that we prefer to be." So again, thanks, Adeline. And thanks to the law school, to all my colleagues at the law school here, to the university for supporting this inaugural lecture. Over the past month, I had the chance to think, what in the earth am I going to do today? What does a professorial lecture even mean? And I decided to use this opportunity to do at least three things. The first is to thank people who have supported me in my journey and share a little bit about that journey. Second, to share my own ideas about the future of the International Climate Change Cooperation in light of the increasing presence of litigation, both at domestic and international level. And third, and this is probably what I'm most excited about, the possibility to discuss together the role of a professor and of university research in law more generally in today's society. So, if you thought you would come and have the opportunity to sit back and relax and wait for the drinks, which will come, I have been told, think again. I'm afraid I will be asking you to join me in this reflection. And that is why I kindly ask you to scribble in the notebook that is sitting somewhere in the audience. There it is. Helping me to chart the road for the next professional phase of my research. And do not worry. If you do not want to do it during the lecture, you can do it over drinks. If you do not want to do it at all, that is also fine. I'm used to non-compliance. I work in international law. No big deal. So, let me begin by thanking those who have followed me and supported me in my journey to become a professor. First of all, my lovely family. Mariana and Julia can finally see me live rather than enduring my webinar voice from my bedroom. Secondly, my parents, who I know would have loved to be here in person, but at least I hope are joining online. Thirdly, all those colleagues who over the years have become great friends, many of whom are in the room today, and have traveled from far away to come. Fourthly, all my students, I see a lot of you here, who over the past 17 years make teaching and working in a university still a wonderful place to be. Finally, all those key people, supervisors, heads of school, and others in the universities I have worked with over the last 21 years. IBM in the Netherlands, Universitat Jaume I in Spain, Surrey in England, and Dundee and Strathclyde in Scotland. I do not want to spend too much time sharing the work and things I have done over the past 20 odd years, but I wish to highlight some numbers and moments that I'm particularly happy to have in mind. Let me start by the 32 strong group of colleagues between staff, researchers, and admin support who built and consolidated the Strathclyde Centre for Environmental Law and Governance, the key leading research hub in the UK and beyond. Its legacy still lives within the wider law school research environment. 4, the years that the LLM climate change law and policy ran between 2014 and 2018. 450, the participants of the IUCN Academy of Environmental Law Colloquium in 2018. Remember Stephanie? What a week. 180, the participants of the first International Water Resources Association Islands Water Congress in the Faroe Islands earlier this year. 2, the times that I had the chance to work before the International Court of Justice, the first time as counsel for the plurinational state of Bolivia in the Silala case in Chile, and the second time as counsel for the International Union for the Conservation of Nature in the ongoing advisory opinion proceedings on climate change state. 600, the number of primary school students in Glasgow and elsewhere, including my 2 daughters, who engage with Island Explorers, an education program aimed at introducing sustainability in a fun and multidisciplinary way since 2018. 6, the Scottish Islands that I worked with very closely, the almost 3 years in which I was seconded to the government islands team leading the carbon. Lastly, 460 is the number of current members of the IUCN World Commission on Environmental Law Climate Change Law Specialist Group, of which I am the co-chair. Now, there's a reason why I focus more on the numbers than the content of my work and research over the last 21 years. And it is not because I am good at maths. I'm definitely not. A lot of my work has been about bringing people together, be it students, colleagues, or practitioners, around topics of common interest. The question I still have is how to develop and carry out legal research that reaches effectively to different communities and leads to impact. More on that later. Let me now move to the second part of my lecture. In this part, I will share my message about a specific topic I have done research and work over the past years. I am aware that in front of me I have known lawyers of all ages, and I will do my best to cater to all of them. The title of my lecture by now, you will know, is It's the End of the World as We Know It, and I Do Not Feel Fine, the Future of the International Climate Change Legal Regime and the Role of National and International Courts. This part of the lecture has 4 sections. First, I will discuss the end of the world, why I do not feel fine with it, and what we can do about it. Second, I will briefly sketch how states and other actors are dealing with climate change. Third, again briefly, I will explain how people like you and me are going more and more often to the courts as a way to push further climate ambition. Fourth, I will end with a few words about how the future could look like in light of the recent trends and developments in climate change mitigation. I do not want to give a lecture on climate science, partly because I'm not a scientist, not a doctor in that sense, but also because the science is clear, despite what people might think. Just a few figures and facts. The increased intensity of extreme weather events is a fact. From the shores of Europe or the USA, we often look afar to see examples of climate change, loss, and damage. but we are experiencing them today very close to our family and friends. This slide provides for some somber reading. Focusing on recent floods in Spain and Italy, for obvious reasons, two of the recent disasters that touch me closer, there are at least 2 points to make that have also a strong legal dimension. First, in light of the fact that we know that these weather patterns will happen more often, will be more severe, public bodies need to be better prepared to react quickly. Disaster risk response, adaptation, and resilience are not something only for the global south. They need to be professionalized and mainstreamed everywhere. Second, the way our settlements have developed over the past decades has not respected nature and has not taken into account the constant alarm bells from scientists about increasing and stronger natural disasters. This second challenge is even more complicated to deal with. Do you abandon settlements, villages, neighborhoods, cities, and move them to safer ground and work more closely with nature? Try winning a tight election on those grounds. King George says in Hamilton, good luck. Often, climate science presentations finish by saying, well, the good news is that we do know how much we need to act to deal with climate change, and we even know how to do so. This refers to the level of greenhouse gas emission reductions that are needed globally to go down, and that is coming down to net zero by 2050 and further reductions between then and the end of the century. In terms of knowing how to do so, scientists, including economists, will often refer to the rise of renewables and the fact that they are so much cheaper than before. Increasingly, people are also considering that we may, or we will have to, also look at crazy geoengineering options to be able to deal with climate change. The risk is that the jump from that to Elon Musk saying that one of the solutions is to get a ticket for one of his climate-friendly spacecrafts and settle on the moon or Mars is not actually that crazy. So let me close this section of the talk by reminding myself and everybody in the room that if I do not feel fine about it, then I need to do something about it. What is that something? What is my role and other people's role in the legal profession in a law school during a climate emergency? This is what I will discuss later with you, but before, let me move to what the world is doing to deal with climate change. Now, in today. So what have these states done to tackle climate change? First, all states have acknowledged that there is a problem that needs to be dealt with. There is not one state yet that denies the anthropocenic nature of climate change. There's not one state yet that vetoes the findings of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Furthermore, all states have agreed in 2015 in the Paris Agreement that global temperatures need to go down and do not have to increase beyond 2 degrees from pre-industrial times. They have also agreed that 1.5 degrees is a safer bet. Even then, we know that for many ecosystems and for many people, even that may not be enough. For your information, we are now at 1.3 degrees over pre-industrial average temperatures. Whilst in 2015, we were only at 0.9 degrees. So things are not going in the right direction. Second, all states agree the pathway that is needed to meet this temperature goal, that is reducing 43% by 2030 and 65% by 2035 compared to 2019 levels. That is just 10 years from now. That's a blip. Achieving net zero by 2050 and further reductions after 2050. Third, all states agree that countries have different levels of responsibilities, capacities, and operate in different contexts and specific circumstances. This differentiation has been enshrined in law from very early on in the regime through the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. Fourth, all states agree that they will develop a plan, strategy, call it as you want, to mitigate and adapt to climate change. However, they have all agreed that they will decide the key parameters of such plans, how much to reduce, by when, and what to focus on in order to meet their own nationally determined targets. Fifth, all states agree that they will periodically revisit these national plans, which are called nationally determined contributions, in light of best available science and the outcome of the global stocktake. More on that in just a second. They have also agreed that when they revisit their NDCs, they have to do so upward. In other words, a country's second NDC needs to be better, stronger than their first, and so on. 6, all states agree that they will periodically undertake an assessment of their efforts in order to determine where the focus needs to be going forward. This is the so-called global stocktake, the outcome of which has to guide successive NDCs. In an ideal world, it is this collective gradual improvement of climate plans that will ultimately allow the community of nations, the world, to safely steer away from dangerous climate change. The truth is that this architecture is really just starting to function. Countries have submitted only their first NDC. These were reviewed last year, and at COP28, the first global stocktake was complete. Countries will only next year, in 2025, set their second NDC. Only in 2028 will we have the second global stocktake, and so forth, and so forth. However, the truth is also that these NDCs, climate pledges, promises, again, call them as you wish, are way too weak. In fact, even if all countries complied with them, research shows that it would not lead us to deal with climate change. Actually, with current plans, we would still face an increase in average temperature of 2.7 degrees by the end of the century, which means much more of Valencia and North Carolina. Now, the Paris Agreement is not perfect, but it needs to be given time and support for it to work. But we do have two big problems here. First, we do not have the time. We do not have it. And two, the Paris Agreement will work only if states want it to work. And this is where litigation has come in, and it's likely to come in even more. So think of it this way. A country has agreed to the Paris Agreement, has come up with a plan, and has enshrined its climate target in legislation. But then, it does not take actions to deliver on its pledge, which, as I just said, is also national law. I guess you see where I'm going with this. Once it is national law, we, in the room, the people in countries where we have access to the courts, can challenge our governments and push them to do more. If we have standing, then we can argue that they are breaching the law for a number of reasons, because they're not complying with what the law says, because they're violating our human rights, and other possible reasons. We can ask the court for a remedy. We can ask the court to tell the government in its decision to come up, for example, with a stronger target, or intermediate target, or develop stronger adaptation measures and policies. All of this we can do through domestic litigation. And boy, have we done so. Since the adoption of the Paris Agreement, the rise in individuals and organizations suing their government has risen exponentially. In some cases, we have seen positive effects, with countries amending their targets and changing their laws. In other cases, the government has won, but almost everywhere, when case has been brought before a court, awareness about climate change, its effects, and its not adequate response has also risen. Interestingly, over the past few years, we are now seeing also cases brought against private sector and not just government. Energy giants, investment firms, airlines are all being targeted because of lack of climate action or greenwashing. Another thing that has changed over the past few years is that people are now targeting not only domestic courts, but also international courts. Senior women in Switzerland, for example, whose climate change case was unsuccessful in Swiss court, brought their case to the European Court of Human Rights, and they won. Islanders from Torres Strait Islands in Australia brought a petition before the UN Human Rights Committee, and they won. And now to the international cases that I am personally involved. These are the advisory opinions. So these are not cases where you have one state fighting against another state. These are legal proceedings where a question is asked to a court, and the proceedings are there to aid the judges in answering the question. The history behind the advisory opinion before the International Court of Justice is quite interesting. In a way, it started in a classroom like this on the other side of the world in another law school, the law school of the University of the South Pacific in Vanuatu. These undergraduate students also did not feel fine about the end of the world, and they decided to do something about it. They decided to take action and started a campaign to bring what they call the biggest question of all to the biggest court of all. Fast forward, many meetings and a lot of successful fundraising after, in December 2022, all states agreed at the United Nations General Assembly to ask that question to the ICJ. So what is being asked? In short, two questions. First, what kind of obligations do states have to protect the climate system? And in particular, do states have obligations in this respect vis-a-vis specific vulnerable groups and future generations? Second, what are the consequences of any breach of such obligation? More than the answers to the question themselves, I believe that the process is very interesting. These proceedings have been called historical for a number of reasons. First time that climate change is before the docket of the ICJ. First time that so many countries and international organizations are part of these proceedings. They have participated in 2 rounds of written statements, and now there will be 108 states and international organizations. This has never happened before. Participating in the last phase, the oral proceedings that start this Monday. First time for many small island developing states before the ICJ. I myself am counsel, lawyer, for the International Union for the Conservation of Nature in these proceedings. IUCN is the only non-state and not fully state member international organization allowed before the court. We are hence in a quite unique situation. Maybe because of that, or much more likely because our acronym in French starts with U, we are now scheduled to be the last participant of 108 to deliver our oral arguments before the court on Friday. And yes, it's Friday the 13th. That may be good or bad, we will see. Let's just say that just like when you have a scrumptious dinner, the ICJ is leaving the best for the last. And what is important is that all of these written and oral statements will be made public. For maybe the first time, you can really see on paper what all countries and international organizations participating really think should be done to deal with climate change. And yes, I did mention before what the Paris Agreement tells you, what should happen, but it's not always very easy to find out exactly what countries have said. Not this time. It will all be on paper and there to stay. So, what will come out of this new wave of climate change litigation? The first possible consequence is that whatever happens at the international law level, the increasing wave of domestic climate change litigation will have an impact on the activities of the most polluting sectors and companies in the world. There is already research showing that carbon major stocks are suffering because of litigation. Since these companies operate based on profits and shareholders' interests, if investing in fossil fuels becomes an economic risk, one would hope that they will stop doing so. The second consequence, this time from international litigation, is that it will be likely be followed by a second wave of domestic litigation. Once civil society organizations get their heads around the three advisors' opinions, they will sit around their tables and strategize. Strategize how to use legal arguments put forward by all these international judges. So in other words, I believe that these opinions will become ammunition for a second wave of domestic climate litigation. The first one started back in 2015 with the Paris Agreement. The third consequence is the impact international climate litigation will have on the efforts of states to deal with climate change, the COP process, if you want to call it. Here, I would hope that it can strengthen it. It can give negotiators and countries interested in its success more fuel for it to do what it has to do: avoid dangerous climate change. However, the reality is that whilst the negotiations and the regime will continue working, and the Paris Agreement structure of national climate plans that I explained before, remember the 6 phases, will continue to operate as intended, the chances that it will deal in time with climate change are very limited, especially in the new geopolitics of a second Trump presidency. With this in mind, what I think is that just like in domestic litigation, the advisory opinions will be used by several countries, small island developing states in particular, to further put pressure on developed countries as well as large developing countries. Now, the extent to which they will plan to return to the ICJ or other international courts to sue them for breaching climate change state obligations under international law and request compensation for the losses and damages they are suffering is very much a matter of speculation and only time will tell. However, one thing that I think is for sure, and with this I conclude the second part of my lecture, is that the current climate emergency has been created by a world which is mostly framed in Western democratic parameters. Democracy in Europe, in the US, and elsewhere has created the Bolsonaros, the Millets, the Trumps, and the Elon Musks. Mostly democratic systems based on capitalism have led to a constant increase in consumerism and dangerous emissions. The truth is that, be it with the Paris Agreement or litigation, we are trying to solve the problem of climate change through the same political parameters in which it has grown: democracy, capitalism, and consumerism. I'm fully aware that these comments are troubling and dangerous. One could infer that the flip side of these comments is that the only way to deal effectively with climate change is to work in opposite parameters to democracy, capitalism, and consumerism. Whilst I'm not advocating for that, I am saying out loud, just like the song, that it is the end of the world as we know it, and I do not feel fine. I am saying out loud that climate change is a political problem, and that what we have today is not working. We all need to be open to political alternatives. And it may be that it will be the new generation that will come up with new ideas and new politics. I now move to the last part of my lecture. The one I will admit I myself am more interested in. So let us go back to the lyrics of the REMs. If I do not feel fine about something, then I need to do something about it. What is that something? And what is my role? Other people's role in the legal profession, in the law school, during a climate emergency. But this is where I'm a bit cheeky, and instead of answering the question myself, I told myself, well, why not ask some of my former students and two dear friends and colleagues to help me do it. And I'm really keen to hear from students who have gone through Strathclyde, law school in different ways, but are now working in non-academic environments. So let me introduce them to you and explain what I have asked them. In a way, all starts from the motto of our university. Strathclyde prides itself as a place of useful learning. So the question I have for myself is, what does useful learning look like from a non-academic perspective? And how can research within a university, and in law more specifically, contribute to such useful learning? And by having a discussion around these two questions, I can start answering the bigger, even personal question of what it means to be a professor of law in our day and age. So, the first student who I have kindly asked to come up and say a few words is Nicola, who I had the pleasure to teach as an honors student, an LLM student, for a while also as a PhD student, and with whom I have worked during my secondment at Scottish Government. She now works in an organization that supports the government and other stakeholders in Scotland called Scottish Futures Trust. Second, Sihon, up there, from St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Sihon was an LLM in climate change on policy in the third iteration of the program. Sihon is working towards becoming a barrister, but in the past, he has worked for the government of his country, both on his island and at the United Nations. He is also an exceptional communications professional. Third, but definitely not last, Kate. Kate was both an LLM and a PhD student of mine. We have worked very closely over the past 6 years. And she's now the first CEO of the Climate Change Legal Initiative, the first social enterprise to come out from the University of Strathclyde, added in Manchester. I had the pleasure to be the founder of C2LI and one of its current directors. So whilst I give them the floor, I recognize that both in the room and online, there are other former students and colleagues who work in non-academic fields, but also in university, whom I could have asked. So I really would kindly ask you to write in the wee book. It should be somewhere in the room. Where's the wee green book? Very well, that green book there. Or in the Zoom chat, what you think are the answers to these two questions. What does useful learning look like from a non-academic perspective? And how can research within a university and in law, more specifically, contribute to such useful learning? And I hope you don't mind, Nicola, if I kindly ask you to come up and to say a few words. Thanks.
Hi everybody. You with me? So I'll begin by apologising that I always close consultation very easily, but I'm recovering from a cold that I think about half the population has in Scotland at the moment, so bear with me and the sniffles. Francesco has assured me I won't be up here for long, so it should be fine. So as Francesco alluded to, over the last decade, he has been my lecturer, my supervisor, my colleague, and most importantly, my friend. So when he asked me to speak today, I was honoured and obviously immediately accepted. He then followed up with, so I'd like you to discuss the role of university in government in 3 minutes. And very on brand said, but it's pretty casual, so I'm sure you could just speak to it off the cuff. However, unlike Francesco, my mind works at the rate of an average human. So I took some time to think about it prior to speaking today and decided that really what I can contribute most is from my own personal experiences, both from working within academia, albeit shortly, and also government, many of which were shared with Francesco. So Francesco and I started our work with Scottish Government as external consultants supporting the consultation and drafting of Scotland's first ever National Islands Plan. And I think it's safe to say that we were somewhat humbled, maybe even a bit taken aback at the differences between the first draft of the National Islands Plan, which was an all-encompassing, massively ambitious document, mainly drafted by ourselves as two academics at the time, and the changes to the finalised version that was publicised after we'd gone through all the processes for Scottish Government. However, once we were both seconded to the Scottish Government Islands team, it became obvious that the finalised document was actually still considered to be very ambitious and relatively unique by Scottish Government standards. And over the next 4 years of working with government, I understood why. Before our secondments, because we had an understanding of the mechanics of government and worked closely with members of the Islands team, we did not have a full appreciation of the confines and process that civil servants have to work within. Having that lived experience of working within Scottish Government has been transformational in how I approach the development of policy. But I believe that having a background in academia, I've been heavily influenced by a supervisor who always encourages big, out-of-the-box thinking, allows for a key balance to be struck. Ambitious policy is fantastic, but it also must be deliverable, or in reality, it's just theoretical. So I think that's my key message. The involvement of university in terms of advising government is crucial, but allowing members of university to gain lived experience within government ensures that there's a mutual understanding of the processes the policy has to be developed in. So maybe the cry is to support those that think a little, or sometimes a lot, outside of the average academic spheres, particularly those who don't just fight for these opportunities for themselves, but also those that do it for others that they support, those like Francesco. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And you lost some.
Oh, sorry.
Now I can, yeah, see how you can come down.
Good evening, everybody. Francesco, first of all, congratulations. I know you said that your promotion happened a few years ago, but I'm just knowing, so it's great. Ladies and gentlemen, it's quite an honor for me to, first of all, be invited by Francesco to give brief remarks. As he said, he lectured me as part of the LLM Climate Change Law and gave me a taste for climate litigation. And as he mentioned, I am now pursuing the bar in the UK to be a barrister, and he's partly responsible for it. Because even now, I'm doing a paper on climate litigation. The issue of useful learning, and because I'm from a small island development state, one that has its own peculiarities regarding climate change, it also has its peculiarities in terms of resource limitation and expertise. And so for us, useful learning will be something that we can take and make it adaptable. Of course, when you write a 25 paper dense academic article to show us how many books you read and how okay you are with the jargon, it doesn't offer much. And so after maybe a few paragraphs, it gets put down and nothing happens. And so, what I would love to see, and I believe I can say this for governments of small island development states, is work from academics, first of all, being distilled into something that's practicable and understandable. The typical minister of sustainable development or climate change isn't an academic, but what he wants is something that his Department of Sustainable Development doesn't have expertise in, something hopefully that the university and the academics who do their research can offer. It is wonderful to be able to come up with some fantastic research questions on your own. But how is that relevant to government? How is it relevant to states? And as I said, regarding those states that are most vulnerable and lack resources, we need the assistance. We need practicable solutions that can work, that can be scaled. And we've heard and we're happy to hear about what the industrial world has done and how much they're skirting around responsibilities. But we'd also love to hear of, in the meantime, small island states, here are some innovative, creative things that you can use to help you put the process along. So, for example, in the area of financing, we know that the developed countries aren't happy to fork out monies to assist the vulnerable countries. The intellectuals in the university who do research can look at scalable programs that can assist countries in developing financing alternatives at home, in-house financing alternatives that can at least give them some leverage in the beginning. When a disaster happens, there's a hurricane, there's destruction, I need money immediately. I can't wait 6 months down the road until the IMF or the World Bank spin me around and have me cross every T and dot every I before I can have a loan at very high interest rates. I need something that can work immediately. And maybe university professors, universities can look at these areas and develop plans and programs that small island states like mine can work with. Now, in fact, Francesco said I work with government, and so if I don't move, I will never stop talking. Thank you very much, Francesco. Have a really good fun.
Last Olympic amount, 8.
I know I'm gonna fall on my face. Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to say a few words. When Francesco asked me to say a few words about reflections on this question of what does useful learning mean and how can the work of a professor and research at a university lead to useful learning, I really started thinking about how we as a society place really high value on professorship. We place very high value on what professors do. And so I was thinking about why we as a society place such high value on this role of professor. I think there are many reasons. I won't go into all of them, but I think one of the reasons that we do that as a society is that we have an innate understanding of the importance of and the power of education and learning. You see this as an example. We've seen lots of pictures of the United States today, but you see it in the United States. People around the world have been asking themselves for the last 3 weeks how a country as large and as populated as the United States could elect as their president someone who is so problematic. We'll go with that. And I'm not going to go into a political discussion and all the various reasons, but I do want to highlight that over the past few decades, there has been a very quiet, systematic, and very strategic dismantling of the public education system in the United States. There has been a
rewriting of the school curriculum. There has been editing of school textbooks to have alternate versions of historical facts. And part of that is strategic because, of course, an uneducated, unknowledgeable population is very easy to control. Now, of course, being taught a simplified, alternate version of things is still learning, but is it useful learning? One of the most important and impactful things that Francesco has done in his role as professor is, yes, to express his expertise. That's what professors do, to do academic research. It's his drive to share his expertise usefully that really sets him apart in my eyes. I think Francesco approaches being a professor as having a duty to make his expertise, especially given the gravity of the subject matter he focuses on, to make it useful. You see that in his approach to teaching, in his approach to translating academic research into practically useful learning. He embodies why we as a society really place a high value on professorship. He strives to make his own academic research and his teaching impactful. We've seen the numbers that you talked about earlier. That's a pretty big impact. To make it useful and really to make it able to be relied on to make meaningful change. That to me is useful learning. I often say that Francesco is an idea man. He has lots and lots of ideas, and then we figure out how to implement them and turn them into something like C2LI. He sees opportunities to spread ideas. He sees those opportunities to share knowledge and share them in spaces and places where they can lead to useful learning. Building C2LI is an example of this, and in C2LI, the whole idea behind it was he wanted to take an academic output, a book, and make sure that it didn't land just on an academic bookshelf somewhere, but that it could be used practically in the world. So here we have 3 former students speaking tonight who have all gone on to do things outside of academia. Each of us have been impacted by Francesco's approach to teaching, to being a professor, being a friend, being an academic who engages in what I would call useful learning. The audience here today is a testament to how impactful of a professor Francesco is. He has a unique skill to maintain contact and connections and friendships with people. And he has an outsized impact through the ripples that causes in each of us. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate, Nicola. Huge thanks, really, from the bottom. I'm taking another break because I not only have asked 3 former students, but I'm also asking 2 dear friends and colleagues to consider the questions about the role of research and law in wider society. So let me introduce them to you. First, Mar. I have known Mar for over 20 years. The first time was at a conference in Amsterdam. Whilst I actually was working with the second person that I invited today, which I will introduce in just a second. Fast forward several years, and Mar was one of my PhD external examiners. And let me tell you, in Spain, it's rather different. At the time, I had many external examiners. Again, fast forward the years, and I was asked by her to be an external examiner for one of her PhD students. And I joined several exciting research projects that she has been leading. Mar is a professor of international law at the University of Barcelona, and I'm happy and proud to call her both a dear colleague and friend. And second, and with this we conclude the people who will be speaking, Harro. Harro and I have been working together since 2002. He was there when and landed my first real job at IBM, at the Free University of Amsterdam. Throughout the years, every time we had to make a big professional life decision, I reached out to him and Michael Melling, which I believe is online, to discuss the pros and cons of a move or a project. I can remember times together in Castellón, about summer courses on international law, in Ottawa, the freezing temperatures in Joensuu, in Finland, but also watching football together, and seeing your own kids and families grow. Oh, and by the way, he happens to be the first professor of climate law ever at Cambridge University. That is technically. Say, how do you come here to do But that is secondary, at least for me, as his friendship comes first. So I kindly ask Matt to come up.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation. Francesco just mentioned over 20 years. I did say that it's a little bit more than 20 years, at the end of the night or something like that. I would say. Anyway, the reflection that Francesco proposes today actually goes far beyond the simple commentary on the knowledge that academia offers today in our discipline in public international law. It concerns actually the mission of the universities, the organization of legal knowledge for practical use, and the role of legal academics in addressing societal challenges. So, as for the missions or the changing missions of universities and their civic engagement ideals, as this motto that they just passed to us, are becoming increasingly reactive to contemporary issues such as climate change. Well, from my point of view, while these missions are admirable, I'm a little bit skeptic about the real impact and scope. But it's true, actually. Universities are not just educational institutions, but are increasingly seen as tools for social and economic policy, capable of driving innovation and contributing to social progress, helping, as he said before, the decision makers to make better decisions, actually. At the same time, while law students primarily come to the university and to the law school to become practitioners, the current academic model, at least in Spain, offers them academics, not practitioners as they want to be. So often we are detached from the real side of the wall in terms of the practice of law, which are all tools. Actually, our tools are teaching and research. So as academics engaged in teaching and research, we need to help the students to understand that the law is dynamic, it's constantly evolving. Academic research, in that sense, I think, plays a crucial role in generating critical thinking and knowledge, which can then have a tangible social impact. So we need to integrate both teaching and research to help the students to think that it's sometimes needed to go beyond the mere application of law, of the legal principles, and we need to approach and to face the societal challenge. The problem is what we do that, and I do not have the answer. He asked us for answers. I only have questions. How do we do that research? Well, I'm coming from Spain, a very traditional university. So from our more positivist perspective, legal academics are often seen as neutral, focused on describing and interpreting positive law. However, in light of the complex challenges facing society today, such as climate change, this poorly descriptive role is completely insufficient. We cannot be strictly neutral. Legal academics should engage with normative questions about justice, morality, and the societal impact of the legal norms, and public international law, and academics in public international law in particular, should aim to contribute to the creation of a more just and equitable international order. This requires legal scholars to integrate values such as justice and human rights into their analysis, even as they remain committed with strict scientific rigor. At the same time, while this is completely true, I guess that sometimes there is a risk today of kind of oversimplification or distorting of legal education. While promoting knowledge about public interest and preparing public powers to defend it much better than they are doing now, and I think it's all important, I guess sometimes that we still need to go back to the foundational principles of law, such as the rule of law. I really think that the rule of law, more in the times as we have been living today, are still necessary, are still useful. So there is a small risk, or there is a risk that sometimes legal arguments, when they are interpreted in a too much creative way, may somehow be face to face to the rule of law itself, in the sense that sometimes even when it comes supported by the judicial embrace, and taking into account that the judicial embrace may be completely different in countries like the United States, by the Supreme Court, or the Constitutional Court in Germany, or even the Constitutional Court in Spain, well, sometimes the question is that if all this process may be being done at the expense of the rule of law, or is the rule of law at risk when public policy issues are to be resolved by the courts and not by the legislative branch? I think there is a risk which is still here. So while emphasizing the need to reconcile legal analysis with societal values, I think that we need to find a certain balance, the right balance between advocacy and the proper functioning of legal system. So I would like to finish by pointing out the responsibility of legal scholars to engage with the challenge of our times. Public international law cannot merely describe existing power relations, but of course must actively contribute to shaping the future of global justice and law. Legal scholars have the potential to influence attitudes and legal developments from the university. We all have, as scholars, as academics, a commitment to producing legal ideas that are not just descriptive but also aspirational, aiming to improve the legal system and society as a whole, while maintaining the integrity of legal principles and the rule of law. So, in Ann Peter's word, probably as academics, we cannot do more, but neither should we do less. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matt. I'm really, really delighted to have half of you. I'll give you the.
Thanks, Francesco. And these congratulations as well. And indeed, this goes back to more than 20 years ago. It's been a very long friendship. Yes, of course, for colleagues as well, but friends foremost. You mentioned a number of things which you didn't mention, of course, that also in my big life decisions, you played a very important role. So thank you for that. Now, to go on to the question, so what role does a professor have to play, a professor in law have to play in society? I have three basic criteria, three possible answers, but I'm also primarily going to talk about how you fulfill all of these criteria and meet all of these criteria and go well beyond them in many cases as well. And I guess the first and most obvious answer to what makes a good professor in law is that we need to be good educators. Right? Like, so then of course, what does that mean? Well, one needs to have enthusiasm, one needs to have very good knowledge of what's being taught. And I think both of those were very much on display again tonight. And I've seen this many times before. And every time I watch you teach, I think it's an amazing way to actually convey some of the knowledge that you have and to convey some of the enthusiasm that you have about your subject matter. And again, I'm quite sure that all of us in the room and online will see that as well. And also, when it comes to teaching law, I think it's also important to not just teach the law as it is on paper, how we read it, but also how it's made in practice and how it's implemented. And again, I think you show in your lecture today, in your role as providing counsel, but also looking at the work that you've been doing at COPs and other meetings, we clearly see that you go well beyond just the law as it is written on paper. But I think working as lawyers and working as a professor of law, focusing on climate change and environmental issues, so a number of the crises that we're facing, we also have to strike a very fine balance. And again, I think you've shown just tonight how you've done that. We need to strike a balance between, on the one hand, the precariousness of the crisis that we're dealing with, the urgency of the crisis that we're dealing with, but at the same time also instilling hope and a drive for people to actually do something about it. And again, I think it's shown not only in your lecture, but also in the testimonies from the students from MAR, how you actually capture that as well, and how you succeed to find that nice balance between, on the one hand, truth-telling. Yes, we know who's in power in the United States, but as well, hope-giving. We also know what the power of the courts is. So in this age of increasing climate anxiety among our student body, I think what you're doing there is striking that very fine and important balance. Now, the second criterion, or the second thing that we need to have as professors, increasingly we need to be innovative. We need to be entrepreneurial. I think we see that especially in this day and age, right? Like with everyone being on social media, stuff out there as soon as they can. We need to think about new ways of teaching. We need to think about new ways of translating our research and reaching the audiences. And again, this is what Kate was talking about, this is what Mar was talking about as well. We need to be thinking about how to actually reach the right audiences. And also here, I think that you've been doing this in very novel and creative ways. And just to mention some examples, maybe going back, I guess this is already 10, 15 years ago, when you started in Surrey, and you set up, I remember very well, this Environmental Regulatory Research Group, or called ERG. But you've done more or less the same when you came to Strathclyde, and this time you just had a slightly better abbreviation with SCALC, so the Strathclyde Centre for Environmental Law and Governance. Also very important, like I think it's probably the first, if not the first, LLMs that you set up in climate change law and policy. And it's in a way a crying shame that it's no longer there, if only because it started on the shores of Loch Lomond in a beautiful house. I could teach any time there. But again, it shows that you have this idea to do something and you actually make it happen. Again, Kate already calls you an ideas man, and I think it shows how you're actually not only able to have these ideas, but also follow up. And of course, C2LI and the work that you've been doing there in the past few years with Kate, with Leonard, with Gusto and others, I think is again a testimony to that. Which I guess brings me to the final piece about what makes a good professor, which is collaboration. And also here, I think increasingly, given the requirements, given the expectations that are put upon us as academics, right? Like, so we need to be excellent teachers, we need to be excellent researchers, we also need to communicate to the right audiences. Increasingly, there's so much expected of us that the only way of actually doing that and doing that in a successful way is by simply working well with others. And again, we see a number of edited books here on the table. We've seen all of the people that you've been working with in the past. It very much goes to show that you're very capable and very easily capable of doing that. And of course, I can also speak from a personal perspective on that, because since we met more than 2 decades ago, we've been working on articles together. We've been working on teaching together, including for the LLM. And most recently, we've been working together on the IUCN submission to the International Court of Justice, which you're doing together with Christina Vogt. So very clearly, you are very capable in terms of collaborating. But not only that, it's very nice for the other people that are collaborating with you. And again, I'm 100% sure that there's a lot of people here in the audience who can attest to this, to collaborate with you. So thanks again for having me here. It's been an absolute pleasure to come over, and I look forward to celebrating tonight as well. Thanks.
Okay, let me just see where we are. So, I do not want to keep you away from the drinks much longer. I want to share what is coming up for me in terms of projects and work related. I didn't prepare this with Stephen, but this very much builds on what Stephen said. Whatever topic I will end up focusing on, I want to be able to do research that will lead to impact. I believe that in order to do so, the research question needs to be co-produced, at least partly, with those stakeholders who will benefit from the research. If you want to do a research that leads to impact for a government, a company, a community, a school, then you need to engage with them first. And not only to develop together the question, but really, more important, to develop that trust, confidence, and relationship. The first will mean that the stakeholder will actually be waiting for your research. And second, that the user, stakeholder, will do its best to take forward any finding or recommendation in your research in the way that it considers most appropriate. In doing so, we'll come back and ask for you for further comments, guidance, and why not, maybe even more research. Now, to do this well, you need two things. You need time and resources. Time to develop and nurture such relationships and carry out the research. Resources to engage with stakeholders and to hire a team who can do the research and develop the relationships with you. So where do I see myself engaging in impact-oriented research going forward? As always, and this has been, I'll be the first one to admit, this has been both my blessing and my curse, in possibly too many areas. So first, from a climate change perspective, I'm keen to see how the process before the ICJ that I explained before can be shared with non-legal audiences and contribute positively to the work that organizations involved in the climate sphere are doing. I will be doing this work with IUCN, but it may be of interest to other groups and organizations as well. There are three strands from an island perspective. First, I'm keen to continue looking at how law and policy can promote increased use of renewable energy without undermining marine and terrestrial biodiversity. All of this whilst putting communities front and center of the decision-making processes. Again, I have started doing this in close collaboration with island governments in the context of my collaboration with IUCN, and I am keen to continue doing so. Second, I am keen to not lose track of examples of island-related laws and policies. I will be acting on behalf of the law school as Secretariat of the European Islands Policy Network that brings together Scotland, Ireland, Finland, and Croatia. Third, I am keen to continue working on the role of international and national law in the context of sustainable freshwater management on islands. This strand of my work will go hand in hand with my role as co-chair of the International Water Resources Association Islands Water Congress Series and the soon-to-be established IWRA Islands Water Task Force. Two newer areas of work will be around cities and football. I have the pleasure of leading the Strathclyde Centre for Doctoral Training of Partnerships for Sustainable Innovation, together with them here, that will be focusing on cities. And co-leading the CDT will allow me to look closely at the new iteration of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, or whatever these will be called, after 2030. Together with a colleague at Strathclyde, I have also started looking into, these are very preliminary ideas, how the law and policy around football associations can be leveraged to green the beautiful game. I am keen to decide which one of these projects has the best potential for it. This may mean that I will not advance some of these ideas further, but in a way they all excite me, and I was keen to share them with you. was I'm sure that I will continue to work closely with my students and colleagues here at Strathclyde, but also with partners and organizations beyond these walls. In particular, I'm committed to continue working and collaborating closely with the Climate Change Leader Initiative, the International Water Resources Association, and the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, amongst others. Don't worry, I'm almost finished. But let me go back to my last weeks in Scottish Government, when I bumped into a virtual conversation which showcased how society deals with climate change, but not only. On the one hand, there was a colleague who was pushing for more climate action. On the other hand, there was somebody who was asking to pause and consider the financial implications of moving too fast. And what about the jobs lost in the oil and gas sector? To which the first person reacted strongly by arguing that this is a climate emergency and that if we do not act decisively now, it will be much worse later. She then went on with some accurate but frightening facts of what is going to happen. At this point, a third person comes in and kindly asks to be removed from the conversation because it is starting to get all too real and scary. I believe we all, in one way or another, are one of those three people in this conversation. And often we can be more than one at the same time. The same conversation, I believe, applies to most realities, not just climate change. Think of people's approach to Gaza, fuel poverty. I know it's bad. Let's be careful about it. Actually, let's not think about it. I'm getting anxious. Recently, I had the pleasure to attend an event with former footballer and now anti-racism campaigner Liliane Thuram. He reminded all of us in the room that there is no such thing as being neutral in big societal and political challenges such as racism. The same applies to climate change. Whilst I can sympathize with the third person in the conversation I just referred to, and I have been that person many times, by leaving the conversation, we are taking a position. We are not being neutral. Quite the opposite. Because you cannot be neutral in dealing with these kind of things. Very much linked to Liliane Thuram's work. I now close my inaugural lecture by remembering there was once a football coach who raised a chair to the sky. It was interpreted as an action of defiance towards the system. In the context of the climate emergency, we all need to understand whether we accept the system that has led us to the current crisis. If we do not accept it, if we do not feel fine about it, we all need to find our chair and lift it to the sky. As a practice-oriented professor in a law school, I look forward to finding that chair together with colleagues, students, and partners outside of the university. Thank you very much.
Okay. So we're going to open for 10 minutes of questions. So if you can put your hand up and once selected, you just say your name and your institution before asking your questions.
Before we do that, she is Stephanie Switzer. From day one here at the law school. So thank you so much for coming up. And the other thing is, I was thinking a lot. I also had discussions with Haruna. Do I really want the Q&A? I mean, does it really make sense in a inaugural lecture? The fact is that when I go to conferences, this is the part I enjoy the most, to be honest. And whether it's about the climate change aspect, the litigation aspect, or the role of research and professor, let's take 10 minutes, if you want, to just have a bit of a conversation around that.
Any questions? Okay, I'm going to kick off with one. I'm going to take chair privilege. So you've been in academia for 16 years, longer if you include your PhD. What's the main piece of advice you would have for someone who's embarking on academia?
Be open to engaging with what Pablo was saying. That's important. Be open to engaging with as many partners within and outside of us. However, it is a very difficult question to answer because the world, even in academia, has changed from 2007. Now to go into academia is much more competitive. You need to have a pedigree almost already established before you can commit. So it is very difficult for me to tell if I think of how I was. I think rather than coming into academia, what I would say to students who want to work in academia, people who are in academia, is that we need to find that balance between academic freedom, which is amazing, which makes working in university not the best thing in the world, amongst probably the best things in the world, but also not abusing too much on that, which there is a risk of, again, doing research for the sake of doing research, but actually engaging with questions that are not just because I love football, I want to look at football, which I will, but also something that actually makes sense and contributes to society.
Any other questions? I think you've said it all.
Hi, Stuart Galloway from the engineering faculty. So I've got an interest in football as well, and coincidentally, I've just started some project working with some Scottish football clubs, looking at their energy use and potentially their sustainability, because energy is only one part of that whole portfolio. So we must meet up in the new year and try and work out how we can work together more on that, I think.
I'd be delighted to do so. And I think, obviously we can joke of the football aspect, but I actually think, and take climate change, but it could be anything else. Try and identify what you really like. Could be football, could be writing, could be musical theater. And actually think, how can I bring back a climate angle to that? How can I bring back, if you're into human rights, a human rights angle? And then that research, call it activism, call it as you wish, will be stronger, better, probably even more fun and more impactful. So I do think, think was it you or somebody else who mentioned this climate anxiety. Let's not beat around the bush. That is there, especially for those who are more environmentally conscious, obviously. But let's think of what we can do, what we like to do, and what we can bring into that. I think that's, again, if you ask me, what would I tell an academic? It's really not just an academic, anybody. Because if not, there is the risk of saying, well, what can I? It's just me. And there is a reality also to that.
Given that you have spent time outside of the Scottish government, the work you've done with ICJ and other things, I'm curious how that time away from academia informs how you now approach being back in.
I'll tell you in 6 months, meaning that I had a very soft landing there to the law school. I immediately put the research lead if you want. But I was thinking a lot of that whilst I was working with Nicola, with Lewis, Scottish government, because I was thinking, and I think especially the assessments. I know I missed it, but I really would like to develop different assessment patterns to my future students. I want to work in a more Not that we don't do it in a proactive way, but in a different way. I want to remember the kind of pressure Nicola Lewis and I had in Scottish government and try to bring it within university without getting fired, which is not easy. So, but we need to find a way to bring that time pressure to some extent, working in groups, and what Tikhon said as well, that different kind of more creative way of developing a legal brief to the minister. Or in a corporate setting at the board of directors, you have 10 minutes and that's it. And that I think I'd like to do better. I don't know exactly how I will do it, but I think that's something I would like to bring from my experience.
Hi, so I'm 18 Pennings. I'm still one of Francesco's students, not for much longer. I'm also a civil servant and a climate activist. And I was actually wondering whether you think that good academics, people who understand the problems we have with climate change, biodiversity, and so on, whether they should also be activists. So speaking out in favor of certain campaigns, maybe either joining the blockade of the motorway, things like that.
It's a very important question. And actually, even just writing this lecture and thinking about it, I mean, the title of it, me saying what I said before, I do feel slightly more activist than yesterday, myself. And I don't know what to make about it. In a way, I would say no. I mean, we're there to teach, to share information, but it's the end of the world as we know it. I do not feel fine about it. I need to do something. And if that something leads to things like that, I don't think I should be penalized, or I don't think I should be not do it because I'm an academic. On the other hand, there needs to be a bit of a balance. So I don't really have an answer, but it is something that I am starting to think. What kind of things should I do? Let's be honest. I mean, sometimes we forget in university as academics, power the right word, but the influence for students, maybe to society is a bit too big, but still, as you said, we profess. So it is something I am thinking about. I'm not there yet. I'm not on the streets yet, let's say. But it is something I think that needs careful thinking.
I almost think court cases are the end of the line when there's been a lack of compliance or a lack of communication. So I'm interested to know, how do you engage with people who don't agree with you? And how do you convert them with facts? Or do you just research in relation to a one-sided event?
The way I interpret that question, the way I engage with that question, it is very easy to say that I don't like the world we live in. I have the solutions, and I only talk to the people who think like me. There's a huge risk in it. Huge risk in it. And take, USA, but we have gone here somewhere, who, Prime Minister is Millet and so forth. It is a democratic system, as far as we can understand democracy. They vote. More than half the people think different, if not the opposite of me, be it Trump, be it Bolsonaro, be it Millet. Who am I to say I have the truth? So I do have to engage with that part of society. The problem I have with the climate crisis, climate emergency, is that in many occasions, again, we have Sihon here from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, but Valencia, North Carolina, we just don't have the time. We just don't have the time to have that very mature, democratic conversation with people who do not act fast enough. Now, like I said in the lecture, I'm the first one to realize that what I am implying is very dangerous. But is it more dangerous to 97% of the houses in the island of Grenadines gone? Is it more dangerous than 240 people losing their lives in Valencia? I don't know. I don't know. And that's a big question. I don't have an answer. I acknowledge that there are so many people who vote for other people who I don't agree with. And if I operate in democratic patterns, I have to respect that. And there's a similarity to some extent with COVID. You know, had we played the democratic game fully on COVID, maybe we wouldn't have the scientists telling us what to do. But it's a different pattern altogether. COVID, climate change. A lot of people use it as an example, but the time scales are different, the geopolitics is different, the economics is different. But it's not a very useful. But it's something I'm just like what you said about activism. It's something I'm thinking very much because there is a risk of saying, I know the truth. I know what, and I don't even want to engage with those who vote for Trump, or back in the days in Italy, or those who vote for Berlusconi. No, they are just as right as I am. They're just as legitimate as I am. How do we engage in a fruitful conversation? Not easy.
Okay. So thank you, Francesco, or should I say Professor Sindico, for this wonderful and really thought-provoking evening. I've really enjoyed it. It's a real privilege to close this event for you, Francesco. We joined the law school at the same time, back in 2012, and you were the first person I met here. And our friendship and indeed our collaboration has held steady since then. I consider your family really close friends. Maria even viewed a house with me, so thank you, Maria. And our collaboration has held steady. And I'm so pleased that Harrow mentioned collaboration because it's a real theme that I think we can pick up on whenever we think about Francesco. Whenever I look back at all your achievements over the past 12 years, your main one is bringing people together. Whether that's by your policy work, whether that's by your contribution to CTLI, whether that's by your teaching or your role as director of SCAL, you're just a collaborator. You're someone who really brings people together and makes them feel included, which is a real skill. It's a real art. You bring energy, you bring passion to your teaching, to your research, to your legal practice, to your policy work, and that's infectious. I think the attendance here tonight is testament to the fact that you're held in such high self-esteem, or high esteem, so thank you very much for that. I also think the emphasis that you place in your career about collaboration, whether that's between countries, whether that's between sectors, whether that's between disciplines, offers a real timely reminder of the importance of collaboration within the climate change space more generally. We have to do this together. I realised that there is wine outside, and Francesco has given me very strict instructions that there are photographs to be taken after, so please don't leave straight away. We have a structured, organised system of photographs to be taken, but you've been a great friend, a great collaborator, and a great colleague, Francesco. And I'm so pleased that your achievement has been appreciated and recognised by the university in granting you the chair. On behalf of everyone present, I extend our heartfelt gratitude for everything that you've done in the past 12 years, for tonight's celebration, and congratulations on your professorship. Thank you again. What we're going to aim for is a picture of everybody in the room, which I know will be difficult. What we think